Hello, everyone. We have gathered here today for a very important discussion. But let me start by introducing our esteemed panel over here today. We have with us Sai Deepak, who although needs no introduction, but let me do it anyway. Sai Deepak is an engineer turned lawyer, a trial litigator, and an arguing counsel who specializes in civil commercial litigation, IP litigation, competition law, amongst many other specializations. He is also the legal mentor of the Indic Collective Trust, and he has emerged as a very powerful voice on the civilizational concerns of the people of India. He's probably most well known for his amazing work on the Sabrimala issue, and we hope that he will be leading the fight for several other issues to come in the future. We have with us Nupur Jhunjhunwala Sharma. She's a journalist and an editor of at Op India. She has brought to us some of the most daring pieces of journalism we have seen in recent times, and has waded into waters that others can only dream of. So, very, very, very warm welcome to you, Nupur. We have with us Sumedha Verma Ojhaji, who is an author, columnist, and speaker. She was born in Patna and educated in Delhi, graduating in economics and post-graduating in sociology. After 15 years in the Indian Revenue Service, she switched careers to research and write a book set in the Mauryan period based on the Arthashastra of Chanakya. Urnabhi, which happens to be one of my favorite books, it then expanded into a book series onto the Mauryan Empire. Currently, she is working on a new book called The Modern Women of Ancient India. So stay tuned. And we also have with us today Yogini Deshpande, who is a civil engineer. She's an entrepreneur and the editor at Indic Today. She has been active in the activism for Hindu issues for a very long time. And we are very, very enriched to have her with us today on this panel as well. And you might already know me. I am the founder and president of Shaktitva Foundation, a non-profit whose intention is to bring women's issues to the front with the perspective of Dharma. So let us get into why we have gathered here today. The topic for our discussion is From Tejpal to Boys' Locker Room. Do India's elites have a misogyny problem? And for those of you who haven't checked social media recently, Boys' Locker Room is a reference to a very disturbing chat room on Instagram, which was recently exposed, where boys as young as 17 to 18 were having very disturbing conversations. The boys were from South Delhi. They were having very disturbing conversations and were exposed to be making extremely misogynistic comments on young girls. So let's start with Nupur as a journalist, and I know Op India has done some coverage of this issue. Would you like to tell us what the issue is, how it happened, and some details about the problem at hand?
So there was a private group on Instagram of a group of teenage boys, young boys, and their chats were leaked where they were sharing private images of women, of girls. Some were allegedly as young as 14 years old, 13 years old, and they were being lewd. There was conversation about raping the women. There was conversation about gang raping the women. And all of this was going on when the screenshots were leaked. The Delhi police started an investigation into it. The NCW took cognizance of the issue. There are several women who've come out and spoken about how they were victimized and how they felt violated, rightly so, with these conversations. In fact, as things go, there was even a fake screenshot, unfortunately, where it was shown that one of the boys was admitting to violating another girl, which was taken down later because it was fake. So I think it is legitimate to add even the boy, who only quoted to be taken as one of the victims in this entire saga, because his name was as tarnished and he was as humiliated as the girls who were being spoken about in that group. And the police has started their investigation, but the fact remains that we've probably just uncovered the tip of the iceberg at thumbs up to the girl who exposed this all, this entire group and what they were talking about in the group, because there are thousands and thousands of groups like this, not just on Instagram, but WhatsApp, even Telegram, because now Telegram gives people the luxury of anonymity and not being discovered. So we've simply touched the tip of the iceberg, but yes, this is what happened, and now it's upon the NCW and the Delhi police to investigate the matter.
Thank you so much. This is like, needless to say, this is perhaps like one of the most concerning things that we have seen in recent times. And I'm glad to know that Delhi police is investigating. So, Sai, do you think that given that this has happened in the past, and do you think that after the Nirbhaya amendments, the current state of the laws where we stand are sufficient to actually tackle this menace? Or maybe like do you really think there'll be some punishment that is possible for some of these boys to be given?
At the outset, let me clarify two things. One, while I certainly aspire to be a senior advocate, I'm not yet one. That's one. Two, second is as someone who doesn't practice criminal law but actually looks at it more from the standpoint of constitution and in general society, I just have one or two things to point out. Looking to the law ultimately to address some of these issues, while there must be a deterrent or a mechanism which allows people to impose sanctions and go after people when an offense is committed, it's so sad that we have ultimately decided to put all our eggs in the legal basket. Okay. And as a lawyer, I must actually point out that law is typically the option of last resort. And if a society ultimately looks up to the law to protect it, as opposed to its own mores, its own values, and its own conduct, and then that means it is effectively given up on everything else and has decided to rush to the law at the drop of a hat. I'm not saying that this particular situation was not serious enough for the law to step in. Of course, it's serious. Let me clarify that. It was serious. There is no doubt that the existence of such a chat room, so to speak, on a portal which allows these kind of conversations, frankly, even the portal cannot do much. It can only provide a feature, and how we choose to use it is entirely up to us. Okay. But the existence of this kind of a chat room points to multiple problems with, I think, not just us as a society, by which I mean the Indian society. I think this is something that's going on across the world, where perhaps anonymity gives people the ability to say things that they would have otherwise not thought themselves aloud. Okay. And that level of utter shamelessness is seriously problematic. And that shows that in the absence of external fetters, they don't have a filter within themselves, and which seriously points to a deeper societal problem, and perhaps at the family unit level. Okay. Something has gone wrong, so awry. Therefore, lawyers can really contribute very little, no matter what you do, no matter how strong or safe the lock is. There's always going to be a thief who's going to find a way to crack that lock open. Okay. So I don't think that's the way to go about it. And you ask any lawyer, the first thing, especially someone who practices this area, which I'm not, they're bound to tell you that law is not the deterrent. Law is perhaps the last deterrent, and it is a desperate option. It's a hope that ultimately kuch to hoga, there'll be something that helps us. So those are my 2 cents.
No, that's a very, very important point, that we do actually in especially in India, we do look at the law as as the savior of many things. And the moment you're angry or you feel that something has gone beyond a certain point, you immediately start looking at the law. And oftentimes that just leads to disappointment, because the laws have been designed for to act as a deterrent, but you can't just make an example like in the yesteryears, and it has to have like a merit, and there has to be evidence. And I understand that the process is long and tedious intentionally. So like you highlight a very good point that this is a wider issue, and this is not possibly not the first time this has happened. This is possibly not the last time this has happened. So speaking of which, Yogini, do you want to talk about, do you think this is a one-time incident, or do you think that this is a wider issue, and in your opinion? You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Neha. Thanks for inviting me. Commenting on what you and Sai Deepak just now spoke about, yes, it's a wider issue. If you look at it, I won't call it history, but 90s onwards, whatever I can remember from my teenage years to now, this is always a very recurrent happening every few years. And funnily enough, it's always South Delhi also. So in the mid 90s or so, I remember there was a case where a girl was, she committed suicide, in fact.
Right.
A young girl, a teenage girl, in one of those, swanky houses on the Mehruli side or something like that. Then in 2004, you had I think that in those days, last decade I was in the US, but I remember 2004, 2005, there was some MMS clip issue that had sent everyone bonkers. Mm-hmm. So it's every few years or every 5 to 10 years, you have this thing that is repeating in the past 20, 25 years. And it brings out, what Sai definitely said is the culture. And so when we were in college, probably it didn't happen so much, or it was not so much in our face, in your face kind of a thing, probably for all of us, in this panel, because the mode of communication was limited. It was either at most you were able to call someone, but even then you had your parents, pointing to the bill, the phone bill, saying, how long are you talking with your friends? And, or you met up with someone. Today, with the internet, it is so easy to transfer information that, in those days, you did not have anybody taking your pictures or sharing it. Today, allow someone to take a picture and you have no clue where it's going to go from there on. Where it will go. Even if, when people take pictures and they may not share it with someone, your phone to, and they share whatever is private in which they feel is going to get a good money, they sell it to the porn sites. So it's, what you are clicking, what you are sharing, or what you're holding on to it's become a very huge privacy issue. And I don't think most people understand what this is.
Yes.
Most parents don't understand, and it's not my life, my body, my rules or something like that. I think, culturally, parents do need to become very particular about how much time the boys or girls spend phone time, what apps they're allowed to use and they're not allowed to use. It cannot be, it would be the same rules for both of them. But there certain rules and restrictions have to be in place. Also, a rape has become very common, in the subculture, like you see in the genre of movies and things like that. They talk about rape so easily.
Yes.
You have somebody like Amir Khan, who's supposed to be the most woke actor walking around, who had made a joke on rape in his 3 Idiot movie. And no, I have rarely seen any article demonizing him for that joke. And everybody thinks it's such a fabulous movie. So it's become so common. It's not, it's become like a funny thing. So that culture itself has to change. It's at the same time, if a case does come up, then I think legally also, so like, all the MMS case that I talked about in 2004, or the 90s case where the girl committed suicide, I don't know where legally it went. I'm sure even then the DCW might have stepped in and the police might have come in and all that. But legally, it's not gone anywhere. So both of these things need to be, done. Even if what Sai says is 80% it's culture, but 20% where the law does have to step in, then it needs to take its, go to the end of it. Otherwise, there's nothing to stop some next person to do it again.
Yeah. So that's a very, very important point. And, actually a lot of, women that I work with as part of Shaktitva have this, go through some version of, their interaction with this sort of hate, this sort of anger. And a lot of times, there has been a lot of discussion within feminist circles in the safe spaces as to why is it that we were not able to identify this predator? Like, why did we fall for it? There's some sort of internal churning also happening. And one of the questions that often arises is like, why did the why did the person feel comfortable enough to share their personal details or their personal pictures, as you mentioned, which is a very important aspect, because previously people were very, very cautious. As you mentioned, people were not even allowed to take pictures of the somebody else, because you knew that it could go wrong. But now somehow there are these sub circles. Even though awareness that this happens is greater, there are these sub circles where people, women, feel comfortable sharing about their personal stories and even their pictures and stuff. So I think one of the reasons is, in my opinion, one of the reasons is that there is, in this, especially the South Delhi subculture, most men, if not all men, claim to be feminists. And there is, in this subculture, there is this, they will act as allies with you. They will help you. If something overt happens, they will always side with you. But yet they are the ones who turn around oftentimes and stab you in the back. And then you find out that there are these private rooms where all these disgusting conversations are happening, and what they're speaking behind your back. So there is, I think there is a sense of that they create this sort of false sense of security. For example, if it was the neighborhood lafanga, or the street eve teaser, who's whistling at you, you kind of know that this dude is like wrong, and I just need to protect myself from it. But how do you protect yourself from these friends, and who have been even your feminist allies in many ways, who have sided with you in these issues for a long time? For example, I think the parallel that is coming to my mind has been the Tejpal scenario, right? Like, Tejpal was seen as the person who was in many ways the male feminist icon. He was writing all the right things about the gender equations in India. He was writing he was welcome in every single elite elite gathering that India saw. And yet, when the real case came out with that with the victim exposing what he had done to her, it was as if, like, the cracks fell open and people didn't know how to react to this. And so a lot of reactions, from victim shaming to victim blaming to she must be lying, all sorts of, we saw the entire circus play out. And I think, like, that points to this specific subculture that we are talking about. Nupur, do you want to weigh in? Sorry.
So I was talking to my, I thought my daughter has appeared again, which is why you're laughing anyway. So I was talking to my niece and nephew who belong to this age group. They're 17 and 18. And we were talking about how this sort of behavior has been normalized.
Yes.
The cool quotient, every generation has this one group of people who are considered the ideal of how we are supposed to be, how we are supposed to conduct ourselves, and how we are supposed to behave. In my generation, at least in our generation, it was, you're supposed to be good at extracurricular activities and academics. I think that was supposed to be the epitome of being an all-rounder and being socially acceptable and respected. There was only one specific group which would indulge in lewd behavior, and they were to a large extent ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
I think now it's become a little reversed, where we were discussing it when we came up with this term called the Friends Meet Sex in the City syndrome, where the intelligent, career-oriented Ross and Chandler are the losers, and the morally loose Rachel and Joey are the epitome of what the society must be, and the epitome of the kind of people who get their way through life. So this sort of behavior has been normalized mostly in the privileged, elite, moneyed classes of the society. It's not just in India, it's all over the world. And what we are seeing is a repercussion of that. This generation is what happens when the previous decade was ruled by sitcoms and a culture that was projected in sitcoms like Friends and Sex and the City. What else do you expect? Because this culture and this behavior has been normalized. It's become something that is acceptable. There is, in fact, peer pressure to have on girls to ensure that they have a boyfriend, on boys that, they're talking about sex. And the conversation around sex is so normalized between teenagers it's all a repercussion of that, where unfortunately this has become normalized, acceptable behavior. So as science said, the law will take its course, but the law comes in after the fact.
Yes.
After something has gone terribly, terribly and horribly wrong,
Yeah.
like in this Instagram case. But then what are parents supposed to do? What are peers supposed to do? What are sisters, sister-in-laws, the families, the society on the whole? I think it's time to introspect why we are promoting, encouraging, and normalizing morally loose and questionable behavior, which has now just started, you've started seeing it in teens now.
Yeah. So I think what you're what this has been my observation as well. In many ways, this is almost like a clash of civilizations, if you may, and this trickling began through normalized behavior through Bollywood first. This Lucha Lafanga hero is going to chase after this girl, harass her, pretty much like threaten rape, and even slap her, and then the girl is somehow going to turn around and become is going to fall in love with this person. So that we saw the theme in the 90s. Now that is slowly changing into this morphing, like this
Sorry to interrupt. We saw this movie as recently as a few years ago. I think it was Sonam Kapoor or somebody who acted in it, where she fell in love with the boy who was stalking her. There was some movie like that. So
Yeah,
it's very recent. It's not a 90s
Oh,
phenomenon.
yeah. I mean, I stopped watching Bollywood, so maybe that's why it appears 90s to me. But the point was, like, what I was trying to make is that there is this normalization of behavior of two levels, right? There's this guy there is a recurrent theme in Bollywood where this guy he is like the neighborhood lout. He is completely does not have a career, has no sense of future. And this girl who's very talented, very studious, God-fearing girl, is being chased after this guy from Tezab to this. And he normalization of acid throwing, of threats of rape, even domestic violence in many ways, intimate partner violence. They all
Shah Rukh Khan and Dar.
Oh yes, absolutely unbelievable levels, right? And you have this, and then the woman turns around and then she falls in love. So like that is the expectation that is building on these girls, that maybe we are supposed to fall for these bad boys in a necessary, in many ways. There is some charm to that, although I don't see it. But like, and many women who did not associate or find role models in Bollywood do not see it that way. But there is a large percentage of our population who do see these film stars as role models, and that is one very big area of concern. Sumedha ji, you have
that men can be masculine only when they're indulging in such behavior.
When they are abusive, they are misogynistic. Yes, absolutely.
So,
I know that you have written extensively about this. I know we have had conversations about this. I know that you have some deeper insights as to like why this culture, like this direction, this thing, that the patterns that we are observing and mentioning happen. Would you like to talk about that?
Let me give a theoretical perspective to all that you have all been speaking about here. As a sociologist and as a historian, I can look at this as deviance. Rape, violence against women, all this is considered to be deviance. But what have we been talking about right now? That this deviance has been normalized.
Yes.
That some way we have lost our mooring. So what have we lost? We've lost our norms. So we could think in terms of the French sociologist Durkheim, who said that it is normlessness, anomie, which is making this happen. Or we could say in terms of the American sociologist Robert Merton, that this is strain. What is the strain? That the desire, as Nupur said, is to be this sex god or sex goddess.
Yes.
How to reach there? What is the means to become this sex god or sex goddess? These young teenagers do not have that means. So this now socially desirable aim, objective goal, how is one to reach that? And the problem arises when whoever is young, 16, 17, 18, the vulnerable age, the hormonal age, when the sex drive is really strong, how do you reach that kind of goal? And then you end up using all kinds of illegitimate means and using all kinds of violent and anti-social means. In other words, this is a disastrous engagement that we are having with modernity.
Yes.
This is what India thinks of as modernity. Feminism, that imported ideology, is part of this whole complex of modernity. where what is important? You are important, your desires are important, responsibility does not exist anywhere. It is just greed. You are at the center of the world, you are the individual. And remember, this links back to Western theories of the Enlightenment, where it was only in the 18th century that they moved away from their church dominated societies, and individuals could call themselves liberated, liberal, free. We do not come from that kind of society or history. We do not need this kind of liberation. I think what we've forgotten is our own ways of thinking. You know, there's a place for sex in our lives. There's a place for dharma, arth, kam, and moksha.
Yes.
Why don't we teach this to our children? Why don't we teach this? Because I was thinking of how to approach a solution. What is the solution for this kind of thing, which we know very well, the entitlement, the greed, the violence that is there in our own self-hating elites in India. So what is the solution for this? The solution is to reach back and to teach ourselves some discipline, some responsibility, to cast our thinking not in terms of imported ideologies, which give you a false idea of what it is to be modern, contemporary, good, desirable, but drinking, smoking, promiscuity without any responsibility. These are not the hallmarks of modernity. These may be the hallmarks of today's feminism, but these are not the hallmarks either of modernity or of a responsible and a well-planned life. So how we need to shift our perspective. We need to shift our perspective back to something which is positive, something which takes us away from this kind of conflicting. And what can I say? See, I've always said feminism is conflict theory. So it talks of the fight between men and women. Men as well as women are victims of feminism today, as you have mentioned, Neha, that it's not just women. Men identify as feminists. They behave in certain ways. They also think that these are desirable ways. And where do we start in moving the role models back from these kind of promiscuous, irresponsible, selfish, and harmful, hurtful behaviors? I think that's what we need to think about.
This is a very, very important point, and I think both of us have written extensively about this, that there's one, and like we like to highlight this, like when we talk about Indian culture versus Western culture, the most common trope that we often hear, where we have a lot of conversation about, responsibilities and duties, what is one topic that is very little talked about very little is the focus on self-control. There was, like, from day one, from the day child was born, there was a focus on teaching this person discipline to control, in not to like curb and destroy the, like, not sexual repression, but there was a sense of self control and balance that was necessary in
interject something here. You know, we are said to be the land of the Kama Sutra. What does the Kama Sutra teach? Yes. The Kama Sutra does not want to arouse you. It wants you to use your arousal in the correct way so as to pleasure yourself, your partner, in a dharmic way. Correct. So it's not about Kama Sutra is used as thought of as some kind of titillating material. It's not. It's all about putting that drive in a way which is good for you and good for society.
Yes, absolutely. So this is exactly what my point was, like, it's not that we are talking about sexual repression, which is like everything is, we should not talk about sex, this is taboo, this is no. Instead, we are talking about, channeling your desires in a way that you control them, they do not control you. And this is what we are seeing in different levels in the society, whether it is verbal abuse, whether it is this sort of like, sexual violence in many ways. All of that is stemming from the inability of people to control them, and for the society to censure such lack of control. We have normalized that, this expression of individualism at the cost of everything else is the extreme, is the idea that we must all look up to.
And we must remember, Neha, that our own society, Indic society, has always emphasized society.
Yes.
It has not emphasized the individual to the peculiarly it's basically acting against society now. It's individual versus the society, and the individual is now harming the society in a way there has to be a balance between individual desires and social harmony. That harmony has been completely lost. And I think that was a genius of our own indigenous social systems, that it tried to bring all this into harmony by thinking of all aspects of society, even the ashram system, which took you into where you should be at every age, and what choice of profession you should have, and then the 4 goals of society. So we, again, the same thing, we need to throw out this disastrous engagement with modernity, so-called modernity, and come back to rethinking ourselves and bringing ourselves back to a sense of perspective.
Yes. And I think one of the biggest problems is when we talk about our culture, we often project this idea of the ideal woman in the ancient society as some Sati Savitri, Pativrata Nari, and which is why I love your book so much, because it shows that there was this entire separate class of women who had more sexual agency than we have ever heard of in Western society. It was not peer pressure, as Nupur mentioned. It was not sexual licentiousness. It was not the forced expression.
I have written about Savitri in my new book, and none of today's modern women will be able to rival her in deciding who she wanted to marry, going after that man, marrying him, staying with him, and generally controlling his life to an unimaginable 100% extent. So I think the word Savitri, the way it is used today, is completely not correct.
Yes. And I think one more, because I work also in the American space a lot, this, what you mentioned, like that Kama Sutra is becoming a titillating material to a large extent. This, this clash of white people who have always seen this, Indian culture as something exotic, as titillating material, this sexual, yoga and naked yoga and peer yoga and all these demented obscenities that are emerging from the American culture, consuming Indian ideas without fully actually understanding what is being said. Because, as you said, modernity is like this individual, like the Enlightenment period is now colliding with the Vedic period, and they don't want to change anything in their lives, but they want to consume all of it and they want to benefit. So how do you do this? Is you see, there's my friend Indu Vishwanathan. She wrote a meme a few months ago, and it is one of my favorites. She often says, that when you introduce some idea to this American population, and especially like specifically white people, they will look at it, they will listen to you with intent, and they will hear it and they will love it, and they'll say, this is amazing, how can I sell it? Right? And that just this in like unbelievable level of commercialization, where this idea is that anything is good only when it can be sold, and there is nothing sacred, as we can strip out everything and anything as long as it is easy to sell it. So then Shiva can be attached to the image of Shiva can be attached to yoga pants, and yoga pants somehow can become hot yoga pants. God knows why do you want to stick yourself into those things while doing yoga, is something I will not understand, because those are one of the most uncomfortable pants I've ever worn. And there is no, like, she started a campaign called There Is No Yoga Clothing, which is, I think, is a revolutionary idea for America. But coming back to this, do you think that the larger political narrative, where we have seen constant normalization of abuse against female politicians that you don't agree with, for example, we had this anti-national headline against Smriti Irani, and then there was this deafening silence from the other side, where we did not want to talk about this because she's not one of us, so why should we defend this? Then we saw Mulayam Singh Yadav famously saying boys will be boys. Those are also the kind of role models that we are setting for our people. After all, we go out and vote for them, and we encourage our children to vote for them. So what does that political tone have an effect on this civilizational matter, as we have said? And I know that you are one of the proponents of the civilizational state, so that's why I'm posing this question to you.
Actually, as someone who cannot claim to be even remotely an expert on gender studies or any of these issues, I think the one thing that I, as a man, I hope I'm allowed to say that, I think I think what is problematic is the negative connotation and stereotypes associated with the concept of chivalry.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't think there is any conflict in a man championing feminism in its sane sense and its sane version, and also subscribing to notions of chivalry, because that instills in him the filter of honor, if not necessarily the toxic masculinity that it has come to be associated with,
Yes.
and the kind of reactions it triggers, all in the name of microaggression and all that. Okay. So
Remember the beautiful song of Bahubali, which was really panned by the Marxist feminists.
right, they did.
Bahubali one, the
I
one
think-
in the,
yeah. Anna Vetikad actually wrote a long piece on it. So, and I think she made the song even more popular. So kudos to her. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think when we speak of Indian sexuality and our approach to sex, two things have happened. We immediately jump, no, look at Khajuraho, look at these temples and all that. We don't even know in what setting and in what era and in what kind of mentality these temples were built, and what is it that they actually represented. Whether they represented celebration of sexuality or denigration of sexuality, we still don't know.
Yes.
Okay. So we swing in all sorts of extremes. Second, I think it doesn't help to actually blame either the West beyond a point, or even let's say pop culture beyond a point, because what it fundamentally translates to is the complete annihilation of the set of values which come from the family structure in India. The source of your values, regardless of the perversion around you, has always been the family.
Yes.
Okay. And once you destroy it in one way or the other, and you start questioning it, there comes a point where womanhood, motherhood, everything is questioned. And if you're a feminist, you have managed to create the impression that for you, sexual liberation translates to sexual promiscuity. And I'm not saying this of all feminists. Okay. I'm saying that some of them have managed to tarnish their own positions and their own cause to such an extent. And I don't think feminism is the cause of women, it's a cause for the entire society. According to me, that's the way it is supposed to be seen, because whatever happens with one gender affects the rest of the society.
Mhm.
Okay. Because we are part of the problem and the solution at the same time. So I think this is something that Madhu Kishwarji has brilliantly pointed out over and over again in her speeches, in her lectures, and in her writings, that the skewed and, let's say, the crazy versions of feminism that sometimes we get to encounter have made it easier for the predators to actually put on the facade and just have a badge of feminism around them, suppress their true colors, and when the right opportunity presents itself, all you need is a lift.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would
So
add something here, just in keeping with what Sai Deepak was saying. He says that the family has been destroyed, and that has destroyed the source of our value. That's absolutely correct. And it is one of the stated projects of the Marxist feminists to remove the family from societal organization. According to their theoretical perspective, the family is the seat and the focus of all exploitation that happens. So it is, I'm afraid it's not a crazy version of feminism. One of the tenets of Marxist feminists is to remove the family as a part of the social system and to shift all the functions of the family to the state, whether it be protection of women, bringing up of children, or any other thing that you can think of. And that's how our jurisprudence is also going. You would be a bigger expert on that. But the stated aim of Marxist feminists is to remove the family from the nodal role that it plays in the social system. And since it is succeeding to some extent, we are seeing erosion of values.
Yes. And I think one a little bit of color I would like to add here is that this themes that we are discussing. We are not alone in this world in discussing that. This debate, this discussion has been going on in many post-colonial societies who are seeing similar clash of values. Like there was this one society, it had its own way, its mores, it had, in many ways, it was far more advanced, which was now superimposed with this, colonial ideas. And now, while the colonies, the colonizers have progressed a certain way, they have decided that this is the universal standard for all progress everywhere, which is like, in many ways, it is missionary in itself. So what has happened is the same thing is happening with Marxist feminism, because in the West, the Marxist feminism decides that, all sorts of the problems of all women come from the scriptures and the traditions of the West. So that must be destroyed. That, that goes on for a while. That's in the 60s and 70s, we see that destruction happen in the West. it is not our place to discuss right or wrong in that direction, but that was the flow of things. And now, therefore, now at this, because we have Western universalism, that solution must fit everybody else. And so now we will superimpose the same thing and impose it in India. And who is the oppressor, or the majoritarian force here? Hindus, and therefore the dominant Hindu or Indic culture as we understand it. And so therefore, as you mentioned, the nodal element of that value system is the family. And so we must also destroy this, because all the problems that are coming from for women in this society must also follow the same source. So this, which is hilarious and ironic in its own way, because even though we may be the numerical majority, by no definition did we even have political control. So all of those contexts are overlooked, and it is like a crass copy paste of ideas, which is no different from any other form of missionary activity. Yogini, I know that you're trying to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, what I was saying is we have been concentrating on women being sexualized or abused, and there is a huge chunk of abuse that also happens to boys, which gets, when every time there is a most of the times what you hear in the news is always abuse of women and or teenage girls, but there is a huge section or a huge amount of abuse that even the boys are subjected to, which somehow does not get, and it comes from the aspect of toxic masculinity and chivalry that Sai Deepak was speaking about, was that you also have this other aspect that men have to bear, so, or things, those kinds of things, where, so because of which a larger whatever the boys are being subjected to is rarely talked about. I mean, it's simple like this. Even in our panel, we've spent more time talking about the teenage girl being subjected to harassment, but we don't know. But I'm sure it is happening there. Not just sure, it is happening there. I'm sure, but we don't talk about it. And I think this is where that's because partly because of the culture, partly because of this other aspects of culture that get dominated unnecessarily. So probably if in another time, both of the things would have been discussed, or it would have been looked at holistic for this. Because of this whole feminism issue, you are absolving of the crimes that are being committed against the boys, because it's only the crimes that are getting abuse that the girls are being subjected to is being talked about. If there is a legal recourse, they will receive the legal recourse. A lot of boys are not getting that.
Yes.
So there's the feminism is also sort of not giving right justice to the boys.
No, I think this is a very, very important point, and in many ways, this is actually connected, because if the ideal of a man is to be this macho person, who always has to be protective and who always has to be, super macho in every aspect of his life, then you can't be vulnerable. How do you admit to being vulnerable? How do you admit that something wrong happened to me? Because that emotional vulnerability is what needs to be highlighted when you're playing, when you're not when you're a victim. And people are loath to admit that something wrong must have happened to them, because they are forced by the society to fit into this idea of for lack of a better term, like the machismo that is extolled so highly in all of these prominent culture these days. Whereas it was absolutely okay for men to be in the same page and to be connected to their we call it the feminine side, but it's mostly the emotional side, to explain better. Like the entire practice in some of the methods of worship is hinged upon people getting in touch with their emotions, not fighting them, not repressing
The
them.
Valmiki Ramayana, all the men cry a lot.
Oh
All
yeah,
of
but
women
never will you see that in popular culture these days, right?
cry a lot.
Yes.
And wherever
By the way, Ramanand Sagar's version shows Rama as wailing for his wife
Yes.
during
there were
separation.
some tears in his eyes, yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there is something, we're all talking about how this culture of, ancient culture where women were so sexually liberated and all was great. But I think what we're not talking about, that there's one aspect which is actually missing today, is how parenting is looked at by women and men. And for women becoming predators or men becoming predators, I personally, as a mother, to a large extent, hold the parents fairly responsible, because what we're seeing today is an era of lazy parenting. Um, Earlier, the responsibility to impart values to the child was primarily the mothers and the fathers. More so of the mothers, because I think the mother can connect with her child on a far more intimate level than a father, at least in the formative years.
Yeah.
Because the mother has carried the child, whether it's a male or a female child. And nowadays, I see that children are being brought up by maids to a very large extent. You have domestic help that is cooking for them, that is imparting values to them. वो गाली दे रहे हैं, बच्चे भी साथ साथ में गाली दे रहे हैं. These little toddlers or 7-8-year-old, 7-8-year-old toddlers are abusing because their domestic help is abusing. The parents are all working, which is completely fine, but there is absolutely no sense of balance as to how to divide time between work and home, parenting and being a professional. The mother is off to kitty parties, and that is an accepted norm now. Otherwise, the mother is considered a loser in her friend circle.
Yep.
If she's sitting at home and tending to her child. In fact, feminism, modern feminism, I mean, I'm not going to comment on all forms of feminism, but modern left feminism demonizes a stay-at-home mother.
Yes.
As somebody who is being too woman or too feminist or too feminine and is not really subscribing to the modern worldview. It's not even seen as an option or a choice or an agency that the woman has.
As the man who is outnumbered and who is the minority in the discussion, and since I'm feeling very insecure, can I just make 3 points and leave it for the rest to contribute?
Yes,
Just 3 points. Yeah. Okay. I'm so grateful because as a minority from India, we claim greater rights. Okay. So, I think the one question is, we rarely give credit for, let's say, rural India when it comes to some of the values that it holds dear, because the kind of normalized sexual aggression and sexual, how do I put it, degradation, I will certainly use that word with responsibility and a lot of, and I don't mind if it hurts people, that we see in urban circles is not to be seen because of some of their clear divides in their head. And perhaps thanks to the binaries they managed to live in, they've managed to respect certain, let's say, distances. Okay. I'm not saying that's ideal, but I'm clearly asking myself whether the so-called gray that we so constantly celebrate and we choose to live in is partly responsible for the encroachment of female agency by supporting her agency in the name of feminism. Okay. So that's one question. So there is a clear elitist bright line to be drawn in this discussion. Okay. Second, I also want to ask this. See, the thing is now, family shouldn't be teaching morality. Schools cannot teach morality. State can't teach morality. Where is the child expected to learn what are morals and what is right conduct and what is not right conduct? It's almost as if we have completely de-recognized and taken a position against the concept of social judgment, the fear of social opprobrium, the fear of being ostracized in the society for a certain kind of conduct. Okay. We have Abrahamized, rather we have internalized the Abrahamic notion that don't judge your neighbor. Okay. Judgment is an important aspect of social behavior. It decides, if you know for a fact that a certain behavior of yours results in social judgment and people will certainly think twice before engaging with you, okay, then it automatically puts fetters on your ability to cross a certain line in personal relationships, in societal relationships, in professional relationships. So social judgment is something that effectively cultural Marxism calls out because it believes that it is the sign of social hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is bound to be there everywhere, but the existence of social judgment as a construct in itself is not proof of hypocrisy. That's point number 2. Point 3, I have a simple, humble question. I still don't know what is the English equivalent, male equivalent for feminism. Does anyone know? I'd like to know. I don't know what is it that men are supposed to stand in for.
But you don't want to get into that.
Okay.
I think it's what we're all doing during lockdown. Huh? We are washing, we are cleaning, we are working. You know, one moment I'm editing an article, the next moment we are chalawing a karchi. I think that's Indian feminism.
Neha, I would just like to take off a bit from what Nupur was talking about, the devaluation of the domestic.
Yes.
This is also something we have imported directly from the United States.
Correct.
Betty Friedan wrote this very, very influential book called The Feminine Mystique.
Yes.
And in which she pilloried everything to do with the home as useless, boring, non-fulfilling, and meant to keep women in fetters.
Yes.
And we have imported that attitude beautifully, and we have embellished it. So everything that you do in the home has no value.
You know,
As a person who stays at home and works at home, I completely disagree with this. But the devaluation of the domestic has reached absurd proportions.
You know, the hilarious part about this lockdown, because I'm sitting in America, I give you some perspective. Now I'm sitting in New York, right? And New York is the central hub of all the crisis that is happening here, which is why we are now forced to work from home. And a lot of this working from home, a lot of people every day I see at work, people come in and they say, you know what, I'm actually able to perform better. My family is happier. I am more content, like aside from the, you know, Bartan Majoing Nupur. But the fact of the matter is that people, because they don't have to conform to so many conflicting ideas anymore, if the child is at home and you're, you know, writing code and the child comes over and says, Mom, I'm hungry, you can get up and give him some food and come back. Right? And so you're not constantly worrying about your child sitting in the office and wondering whether did he eat today, did the maid serve food today, was he okay? You know, all that worry is sort of taken away. Even though it is harder, it is obviously also creating all sorts of conflicts because we're not used to this, and we haven't come up with a system where this can happily coexist. So you're torn between 9 to 5 job, you have to sit in front of the computer. And also take care of your mental health and also closed in your family. So despite, I'm not saying this by any means is ideal, but what I'm trying to highlight is that now the West, at least in the West, they are seeing a new form of working culture emerge, where you're not constantly you don't have to be constantly at conflict with your family. And so
division between home and work happened only after the Industrial Revolution.
That's what I was getting to.
It wasn't there before.
Yes.
And
That's
I don't know how humanity can actually go along with this. Perhaps it's time we reverted.
But if you look, that's what, like, to Sai's point, right? In the Indian villages, this is not at all at conflict, because whatever the kind of work they may be doing, and we have a variety of professions happen in Indian villages, people always have come up with a better work-life balance scenario in the Indian villages, and something, again, we are too elite to probably look back at.
And it's not only the men who work on farms. Everybody works.
Yes, absolutely. Like,
and in Indian villages, it's not the only a child is the village's child. He's
yes,
not just
very
important. Parent's child.
Yes.
So the entire village is involved in raising that child, and hence he imbibes those values. I live in a joint family, and if I think something is, I'm just giving you an example, if I think something is acceptable, and my mother or my father or my sister or my sister's daughter thinks it's not, they are going to keep my daughter in check automatically, even if I don't. So which is why it takes a village to raise a child. And it comes from there. As long as the family is intact, you will always have a system of checks and balances, and your child will always grow up with morals and with ethics, and, you know, they'll be an asset to the society.
Yeah.
In the current scenario, the way our society is going with nuclear families during the formative years of our child, where parenting is looked down upon, for a woman being stay-at-home mother is looked down upon, having children where you don't have domestic help on the children is looked down upon. I think it's very difficult for any sort of law to change. Coming back to what happened on Instagram, it's very difficult to change that sort of behavior.
Maybe there's a way out.
We don't go back to, you know, how the village raises a child.
Maybe there's a way out. Just consider this. If your driver under your employment runs over people, then you as the employer have a certain responsibility.
Yeah.
If your dog bites someone, okay, then you have a responsibility. And if your minor son or daughter does something, okay, I think to some extent, parents must take responsibility, and not just societal responsibility, but legal responsibility, so that parents are put under some kind of pressure saying, "Arey, agar kuch nahi karenge to hamare khilaf case ho jayega."
But
Okay.
Deepak,
Yeah,
in the
I think that is
of law, can parents actually be given some legal, is there some legal recourse if their minor children commit some crime?
That's what I'm saying. So, to the best of my understanding, there is no such mechanism at this point, with all the caveats and disclaimers that go with being a lawyer. Okay, but I'm saying that this is something that I haven't heard heard people speak about, and I think it's time that we start doing it, because unless and until the law decides to drill some, let's say, moral values in the minds of the parents first, and tell them that you can't delegate and outsource the task of bringing up your children to schools with that in overcrowded schools where the teacher has to do everything under the sun. Okay, then I think is when you start seeing a turnaround. So law, as opposed to being a deterrent, must force people to go back to the basics when it comes to some of these issues. So the function of law and the role of law is something also I think we must start thinking differently about. Okay, and
I think that is necessary. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Just one final point. The thing is, I think the concept of a prude and the social opprobrium that is associated with being a prude. Okay, I am not one myself, and I think the best of my friends know, and Nupur certainly knows that. Okay, so all I'm trying to say is that so the prude has become a social outcast.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
And someone who believes that something's right and something's wrong for their own. See, I think. People are entitled to define for themselves what values are good for them, what is not. And now the role of peer pressure and its overwhelming impact on changing what you genuinely and instinctively believe in is where I think what has happened is you have surrendered your original independent thinking, all in the name of peer pressure, at a time when we celebrate independent behavior, break the rule and all that. I think the first break the rule is to follow the rule sometimes in today's world. Okay. So that is something that we may want to, because you see, I heard someone, a very famous exponent, basically saying that some women end up finding Rama boring and Krishna more exciting. Okay. I heard them say this.
Exciting. Oh my God.
Because Krishna breaks the rules and Rama adheres to the rules, and Rama is so boring because he's constantly speaking of dharma, whereas Krishna is like, you know what, break the rule. Okay, so I don't know where they get all these things from. Okay,
Krishna
exactly. Now here's the funny part. No, I'm actually taking it to a very serious point, which is we have decided to recast our epics, our itihasas and our Puranas in this nasty mold, where we have to try and appeal to the cool attitudes of the current as opposed to telling these people what you think is cool perhaps may be detrimental in the long run. You have lost the spine to tell people you're wrong and call a spade a spade. That is where I think the problem is. Political correctness has entered even the family.
Very, very important point. Again, I'll bring this back. I'm sorry, I keep observing these parallels with American culture that I'm sitting in. But this is a very important point. And yesterday I was reading the Enlightenment authors because I was taking a course and I'm studying the Western Enlightenment in a more rigorous way. And I noticed that there was this recurring theme where the Enlightenment authors were constantly trying to break away from the society, and they were lionizing the rebel. They were lionizing the person who was breaking the rules, and there was a background to it. Why they did it was because before that, the church decided that these were the rules, and you would be literally punished or hanged, or some ridiculous form of medieval torture will be applied to you if you disagree, even disagreement. So there was this cultural baggage where disagreement was not socially acceptable, where you were getting prosecuted by law, and that was seen as a form of oppression. So a lot of this rebel talk that is, that finds its ways into modernity is a response to that. It is a reaction to that. Much like the Western version of feminism was a response to the Western patriarchal culture that was prominent because of Christianity and several other elements. So there was that reaction, and again this Western universalism is at play here, because we never had that baggage, and yet we are seeing the solution play out as if like our we never had blasphemy laws, we never persecuted people. There was social ostracization, and the society sort of, yes, they will disagree, they will not talk to you, they won't like you, all of those happened, but there was nothing in the legal system that stopped you from expressing your opinions, or except for extremely deviant behavior, a lot was not punished. Yet this
come from a
response has
tradition of
found
Vad
its
and
way into
Samvad.
modern.
We come from a tradition of Vad and Samvad.
Yes.
Talk to each other if there are contradictory theories or ideas, and then we arrive at either agreeing to disagree, or I come up with a new theory and I don't agree with you. This, as you rightly point out, this idea of blasphemy never existed. And yet we have imported laws, ideas, today cultural ways of behaving, which come from a completely different reality.
But I don't think even the what is the ideal mode of parenting is a monolith even in the West, or even for that matter in the US, because from whatever little I know of it and whatever little I've experienced, let's say among Mexican Americans it's different, among the Caucasian whites it's different, among Hispanics it's different. What is the problem is the adoption and endorsement of the Caucasian white hands-off approach to parenting, which Indians in India and Indian Americans have endorsed wholeheartedly, because they believe this is the way to find social acceptance, because this is the cultural norm at this point, when in fact it is not even the norm in the country of its origin.
Yes. In fact, this is a very post-colonial thing. Like the post-colonial societies
White parents who I know who belong to really the elite class, who have very, very strong conservative values. The college that my two children have gone to, they have studied in a group of Caucasian white children who come from very strong, very conservative families. So this is actually the culture of just one section of the United States. I don't even know if you can say that all whites also subscribe to
no.
this.
But we are not saying all whites or all people. Like, of course, you will find I think what he's referring to is the this
Dominant narrative.
Western, is the Western Enlightenment theory. A lot of the conservatives
movies.
No, I meant like, you know, the a lot of conservative parenting that we're talking about. What are they conserving? That is the native Christian culture, which was stronger, tighter parenting. But there are other problems to those cultures, which led to the Enlightenment in the first place. So now there is this. What he's talking about is the dominant narrative and dominant culture. Actually, Indu made a very interesting comment on in our chat on Facebook. She says that in middle school in especially in America, the schools also educate the parents. So oftentimes the parents maybe don't even know what to do, and so the schools have also now helped parents understand what they should be doing at home. So now this which brings me to this very like, I love the lazy parenting term, by the way, Nupur. I'm going to use it everywhere. But what I was trying to get to is that we see this even today. Like when we sometimes, all of us have at some point tweeted or written about this, that there is this degradation, and a lot of Hindus who are proud Hindus don't also know what Hinduism really stood for. And so the moment, every time you tweet this, at least 100 people will pop up and they will say, yes, we should introduce this in the schools. Everything that you want to teach should be included in the schools, because the parent has divorced this idea that they should also be teaching something to their children. And that is where I think we are all sort of converging on. And this has been so enlightening, so enriching. This is an amazing conversation, and probably.
But no, you have not asked, how would a girl's locker room on Instagram or let's say on Telegram look like?
Oh, it happened already. By the way,
it happened already.
Okay.
That has happened. Not look like
Then
this.
why didn't we discuss that as well?
No. Okay, so this is I'm glad that you asked that, because there have been screenshots where girls were talking about their bodies, about the bodies of men they were interested in. There were salacious comments being made, but this was different. The reason we pointed to boys' locker room specifically is because,
Right.
first of all, there was a certain loss of, there was a threat to physical violence. There were plans and normalization of physical violence to these people that is not that does not have a parallel. So which is why this conversation started, which is also why we talked about Tejpal and not all the other women who may salivate on Prabhas's body. I know Nupur and I are one of them, but that's
Eyes
not.
are lighting up.
and all of us are guilty of that. We're not talking about eye candy discussions, but the conversation did start, and the screenshots are appearing, and of course a lot of these screenshots are used to negate that the problems of the boys locker room, and we wanted to stray away from that. But I think, guys, this has been probably one of the deepest conversations we've had on the subject in the Indian scene. And I'm being presumptive here, but we all of us together have put in many years on observing the ridiculous TV debates we have. And I think this has been perhaps the most constructive one, the one that actually went into philosophical issues. It touched upon all the aspects from legal to parenting. And I'm so grateful for all of you for coming here and enriching us with this perspective. I think this I will archive this and preserve this video for time to come.
I'm happy to have actually provided the diversity quotient in this. Otherwise, I'm sorry, male minority discussion.
Yes, because otherwise, it would have looked like all the auntie-Gs are trying to beat me, boys, which is not what is happening here. I wanted to make that point here.
We can just go off Facebook Live and then oppress him later.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.